Hey guys, tonight we're taking a relaxing trip back to ancient Rome, a place that collapsed nearly 2,000 years ago, yet somehow still runs your daily life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Standing in line feels so normal today that questioning it feels almost rebellious. You line up for coffee, you line up at airports, you line up at government offices where time goes to die. Sometimes you line up just to ask someone why the line is not moving, and yet you obey, calmly, patiently, like a well-trained Roman citizen waiting for grain, because that is exactly where this habit comes from. Ancient Romans adored order, not fairness, not efficiency, order. A straight line of quiet people was Rome's favorite form of crowd management. It looked disciplined, it looked civilized, and most importantly, it stopped people from stabbing each other over bread. Grain distributions were legendary. Thousands of citizens showed up, stood in line, and waited. If you arrived early, you ate. If you arrived late, Rome taught you an important lesson about personal responsibility and hunger. No exceptions, no compassion. The line did not care that your sandals broke or your child cried. The line had spoken. Romans applied this logic everywhere. Courts, public baths, temples, military pay, even executions. Yes, executions. People queued while officials processed paperwork, adjusted robes, and made sure the vibes were correct. Imagine standing there, shifting your weight, thinking, I hope this moves faster before lunch. Perfectly normal Roman behavior. The brilliance of the line was psychological. It created the illusion of fairness without actually guaranteeing it. Everyone suffered equally. And people tolerate suffering much better when it is organized. Chaos causes revolts. Lines cause resignation. Fast forward 2,000 years and nothing has changed. You still stand in line even when technology could eliminate the need entirely. Self-checkouts exist, yet lines remain. Online forms exist, yet waiting rooms persist. Why? Because the ritual matters more than the outcome. And the most Roman part of all? When someone cuts the line, people do not shrug. They feel moral outrage, deep, personal betrayal. Society briefly unites in silent judgment, because the line is sacred. Not the service, not the result, the line. So the next time you stand quietly behind someone for no clear reason, staring at the back of their jacket like it holds ancient wisdom, remember, you are not waiting. You are honoring a Roman social control mechanism designed to keep hungry people calm, and it is still working beautifully. If ancient Rome had a religion, it would have been paperwork. Romans did not trust memory. They did not trust verbal promises. They barely trusted each other. What they did trust was ink, wax seals, witnesses, and documents long enough to make you forget what you were agreeing to in the first place. If something was not written down, it might as well have never happened. Love faded. Loyalty shifted. But paperwork was eternal. Roman contracts governed everything. Marriage agreements, business deals, property transfers, loans, employment. Even friendships of convenience somehow involved documentation. There were contracts for selling land, renting rooms, lending money, freeing slaves, and occasionally promising not to sue someone later when you inevitably changed your mind. And these were not short documents. Roman legal language was dense, repetitive, and intentionally confusing. Not because clarity was difficult, but because complexity created authority. If you could not understand the document, that meant the system was working. Lawyers thrived. Ordinary citizens nodded politely and hoped nothing bad would happen. Fast forward 2,000 years and here you are, clicking "I agree" on terms and conditions longer than most ancient epics. You have not read them. No one has read them. Somewhere deep down you know this, but you click anyway. Why? Because Rome taught us that legitimacy comes from written agreement, not comprehension. Modern contracts follow the same logic. Rent an apartment? Contract. Start a job? Contract. Cancel a subscription? Surprise contract. Even borrowing a ladder from a neighbor feels like it should involve at least 2 signatures, and a witness named Marcus. The Roman obsession with written proof created a culture where protection mattered more than trust. If something went wrong, the document mattered more than intent. That belief survived perfectly. Today, it was in the contract ends arguments, friendships, and sometimes entire court cases. And the most Roman part of all? Even when contracts clearly favor one side, society treats them as sacred. You agreed. The document exists. Therefore, the outcome is fair, regardless of how absurd it is. So every time you sign something you barely understand, congratulations. You are participating in a Roman tradition designed to protect systems, not people. You are not agreeing. You are submitting. Ancient Rome did not just invent bureaucracy. It perfected it, polished it, gave it a title, and then made sure it could never be removed. The Roman Empire ran on layers of administration stacked so high that even the administrators sometimes forgot why they existed. And if that sounds familiar, congratulations. The system worked. Rome loved offices. Offices to manage provinces. Offices to manage other offices. Offices whose sole purpose was to check whether another office had filled out the correct forms in triplicate. Efficiency was optional. Procedure was mandatory. If you wanted something done in Rome, you did not simply ask. You petitioned. Then you waited. Then someone reviewed your request. Then someone reviewed the review. Then someone decided the paperwork was missing a seal. Then you started again. Rome understood that power is not just about control, it is about delay. Bureaucracy created distance between the problem and the solution. And distance, Rome discovered, prevents anger from becoming action. When people are busy navigating forms, rules, and offices, they are too tired to revolt. You might be frustrated, but at least you are occupied. This system spread everywhere. Taxes, legal disputes, military logistics, citizenship requests. Everything passed through layers of officials whose authority came not from solving problems, but from processing them. If nothing got fixed, that was unfortunate. The system, however, functioned beautifully. Fast forward to modern life, and the inheritance is painfully obvious. You submit forms. You wait. You call departments that redirect you to other departments that insist you should have contacted the first one. Nobody is evil. Nobody is helpful. Everyone is following procedure. And the most Roman feature of all? No one takes responsibility. In Roman bureaucracy, responsibility dissolved as it moved upward. Each official did their part. If the outcome was disastrous, it was not anyone's fault. It was the process. Modern bureaucracy operates exactly the same way. Problems are never solved. They are handled. The genius of Roman bureaucracy was not that it organized an empire. It was that it trained people to accept inefficiency as normal. Waiting became part of life. Frustration became background noise. Complaining became pointless. So the next time you spend an afternoon accomplishing absolutely nothing while following official procedures, remember, you are not failing. You are honoring a Roman tradition designed to keep systems intact and people tired. And once again, it is working exactly as intended. Ancient Rome loved titles the way modern people love job descriptions that sound important, but explain nothing. Senator, consul, praetor, tribune. Each title came with robes, privileges, and an unspoken agreement that whatever this person said should probably be taken seriously, even if no one was entirely sure why. In Roman society, titles were not just labels, they were shortcuts. You didn't need to prove competence if you had the right title. The title itself was the proof. If a man was called consul, then clearly he knew what he was doing. Or at least Rome agreed to pretend he did. This mindset solved a major problem for the empire. With millions of people spread across vast territories, Rome needed instant authority. Titles allowed citizens to obey without thinking too hard. You didn't argue with a title. You deferred to it. The logic was simple. Hierarchy saves time. 2,000 years later, we never questioned this logic. We just updated the vocabulary. Manager, director, senior advisor, executive officer, lead consultant. Titles that immediately command respect even when the actual job description is foggy at best. We nod in meetings, take notes, and assume competence, not because we've seen results, but because the title says we should. And the truly Roman part? Questioning titles is still considered rude. In Roman times, openly challenging someone of higher rank was seen as disruptive, disrespectful, and potentially career-ending. Today, questioning authority in professional settings is often labelled unprofessional, difficult, or not a team player. Same rule. New costumes. Titles also create a comforting illusion of order. If everyone has a place in the hierarchy, then the world feels stable, even if the people at the top are improvising wildly. Rome understood that people prefer predictable authority over uncertain freedom. Of course, this system had flaws. Roman history is full of incompetent officials, corrupt governors, and titled men making catastrophic decisions with confidence. But the system itself survived. Because once society agrees that titles equal authority, the system no longer needs to be effective. It only needs to look official. So the next time you feel compelled to respect someone purely because their email signature is longer than a short poem, remember, you are not being polite. You are participating in a Roman tradition designed to replace judgment with hierarchy. And just like Rome, we are still pretending it makes sense. Ancient Rome believed clothing was not about comfort, practicality, or personal expression. Clothing was about rank. What you wore told everyone exactly where you stood in society, and more importantly, where you did not belong. Dress codes were not suggestions. They were social law. The toga is the best example. It was heavy, awkward, difficult to wear correctly, and wildly impractical for daily life, which is exactly why it mattered. Only Roman male citizens could wear it. Foreigners could not. Slaves absolutely could not. Women wore different garments entirely. The toga existed less as clothing and more as a walking sign that said, "I have legal rights." Wearing the wrong clothing in the wrong place could get you fined, mocked, or quietly escorted away by someone with authority and very little patience. The message was clear. If you did not look correct, you did not belong. Rome understood that appearance enforces hierarchy faster than any speech. Fast forward 2,000 years, and we are still doing this, just with better tailoring and less draping fabric. Modern dress codes rarely have clear logic. You must dress professionally, which usually means uncomfortable shoes, restrictive clothing, and colours that express absolutely nothing about your personality. Offices insist on formal wear, even when the job involves sitting still and typing. Courtrooms expect specific attire not because it affects justice, but because it looks serious, and the Roman logic remains intact. Dressing correctly signals respect for the system. Dressing incorrectly suggests rebellion, incompetence, or poor character, none of which have anything to do with your actual ability. What makes this even more Roman is how vague the rules are. Rome never wrote down exactly how to wear a toga correctly either. You were simply expected to know. Modern dress codes work the same way. Break them accidentally, and everyone suddenly remembers the rules very clearly. The system survives because people enforce it on each other. No guards needed. Just side eyes, whispers, and passive-aggressive comments about appropriate attire. So every time you put on clothing you dislike because the situation demands it, remember, you are not being professional. You are honoring a Roman tradition designed to signal hierarchy, obedience, and belonging, all without saying a word. Rome would be proud. Ancient Rome believed deeply in one sacred principle. The system is never wrong. People, situations, reality itself, all of these could fail. But the system? Untouchable. If something went wrong, it wasn't because the system was broken. It was because you misunderstood it, misused it, or simply deserved the outcome. This belief was incredibly useful for running an empire. Roman law was complex, rigid, and often cruel. Appeals took time. Errors were common. Injustice was frequent. But questioning the system itself was dangerous. You could complain about individuals. You could beg officials. You could write petitions. What you could not do was suggest that the structure might be flawed. That crossed from inconvenience into rebellion. And somehow, we inherited this mindset perfectly. Today, when a system fails you, when paperwork disappears, deadlines contradict each other, or procedures make no sense, the expectation is still the same. Accept it politely. You may feel frustrated, but expressing that frustration too strongly makes you the problem. That's just how the process works remains one of the most Roman sentences ever spoken. The beauty of this rule is how efficiently it shifts responsibility. If the system denies you something unfairly, it is not unjust. It is procedural. If you suffer because of it, that is unfortunate, but technically correct. And technically correct, as Rome would have said, is the best kind of correct. Romans trained their citizens to internalize failure. If a form was rejected, you filled it out again. If a decision made no sense, you accepted it. Persistence was allowed. Resistance was not. This created obedient populations who blamed themselves instead of institutions. Modern systems operate exactly the same way. You follow instructions that contradict each other. You repeat steps you already completed. You explain your situation to 5 different people who cannot help you. And at the end, you are told the outcome is final. Not because it is fair, but because it is official. And the most Roman part? You are expected to be grateful for the opportunity to participate. So the next time a system wastes your time, energy, or patience, remember, you are not unlucky. You are honoring a Roman tradition designed to protect systems from accountability, and it is still undefeated. Ancient Rome loved efficiency, and nothing corrected behavior faster than embarrassment. If you wanted people to obey rules, pay taxes, or stop doing something inconvenient, you did not quietly scold them in private. You shamed them, publicly, enthusiastically, preferably in front of a large crowd with opinions. Roman trials were not discreet affairs. They were performances. Accusations were spoken aloud. Punishments were visible. Mistakes were remembered. Shame was not a side effect of justice. It was the justice. The goal was never just to punish the individual. The goal was to make everyone watching think, I would very much like to avoid being that person. This worked beautifully. Rome understood that fear fades, but embarrassment lingers. You can survive a fine. You can recover from punishment. But being publicly labelled incompetent, immoral, or untrustworthy, that sticks. That reshapes behaviour permanently. And somehow, we never stopped doing this. Modern society claims to value privacy, empathy, and growth. But the instinct to shame remains intact. We still believe that exposing mistakes publicly will fix problems. Only now, instead of the forum, we have social media. Instead of stone steps, we have comment sections. Instead of magistrates, we have strangers with usernames and strong opinions. The structure is identical. Someone violates a norm. Their mistake is amplified. A crowd gathers. Judgment spreads faster than understanding. The lesson is delivered not through correction but humiliation. And once again, the goal is not education. It is deterrence. The most Roman part is how normalized this feels. When someone is publicly shamed today, many people justify it by saying, they deserve it. That sentence would have fit perfectly in a Roman courtroom. Context rarely matters. Proportionality rarely matters. What matters is that the spectacle reinforces the rules. Rome also understood something darker. Public shaming creates compliance without resistance. People internalize fear of embarrassment and self-police their behavior. No guards required, no laws enforced, just the quiet pressure of social observation. And yes, sometimes public accountability is necessary. But Rome did not care about nuance. Shame was applied broadly, generously, and often without mercy. The system did not aim to improve people, it aimed to control them. So when modern society rushes to publicly shame rather than privately resolve, remember, this is not progress. It is Rome, just with better lighting and worse comments. Ancient Rome had a very simple formula for determining who should be listened to. Whoever had managed to stay alive the longest without being stabbed. Age in Roman society was not just a number, it was proof. Proof of experience, survival, and presumed wisdom, whether or not any actual wisdom was present. This belief shaped Roman politics, law, and daily life. The Senate itself was built on the idea that older men were inherently more capable of governing, not because they had better ideas, but because they had been around long enough to collect opinions, allies, grudges, and an impressive tolerance for boredom. Youth, meanwhile, was seen as reckless, emotional, and suspiciously energetic. Rome did not ask whether an elder was wise. It assumed wisdom as a side effect of aging, like wrinkles or joint pain. And we kept this rule almost perfectly intact. Modern society still equates age with authority. Seniority matters. Years served outweigh ideas offered. In many workplaces, the longest-standing employee automatically receives respect, even if their main contribution is reminding everyone how things were done back when this system made sense. Questioning older authority figures is still treated as disrespectful rather than analytical. Offering new ideas can be labelled naive. Suggesting change is often met with a Roman classic. That's not how we do things, which is a sentence that has survived longer than the empire itself. Rome loved tradition because tradition did not argue back. Older individuals became living symbols of stability, even when they actively resisted progress. This made systems predictable. Predictability, Rome believed, was safer than improvement. The irony is that Rome was also filled with young people doing the actual work. Soldiers, labourers, clerks, builders, messengers. The empire ran on youth, but listened to age. That imbalance caused stagnation more often than success, yet the rule survived. Today, we repeat the same pattern. Younger generations adapt faster, innovate faster, and respond faster to change, but authority often remains locked behind age thresholds. Not because age guarantees wisdom, but because tradition says it should. And the most Roman part? When older systems fail, blame rarely flows upward. Instead, younger people are told they lack patience, discipline, or respect. So the next time someone dismisses an idea simply because it came from someone too young, remember, this rule has nothing to do with wisdom. It has everything to do with Rome deciding long ago that age feels safer than change. And once again, we never bothered to update the rule. Ancient Rome believed laws were sacred. Unfortunately, they also believed laws should be written in a way that made ordinary people feel slightly unwell when reading them. Roman legal language was dense, formal, repetitive, and intentionally intimidating. This was not an accident. Confusion was a feature, not a flaw. Roman laws were written by elites, for elites, and interpreted by professionals who had spent years learning how to untangle sentences that refused to end. If you understood the law, congratulations, you were powerful. If you did not, congratulations, you were normal. The average Roman citizen did not read legal texts. They listened to them being read aloud, nodded politely, and hoped the outcome would not be terrible. The complexity created dependence. If the law was hard to understand, you needed experts. If you needed experts, the system stayed firmly in control. And once again, we preserved this tradition with remarkable dedication. Modern legal language still sounds like it was written by someone actively trying to avoid clarity. Sentences stretch across entire paragraphs. Simple ideas are buried under layers of formal phrasing. Words that no one uses in daily life suddenly appear and demand respect. Ask yourself honestly, have you ever read a legal document and felt calm afterward? Or did you finish it with a vague sense of dread and the suspicion that you accidentally agreed to something irreversible? This is Roman law doing exactly what it was designed to do. Legal complexity creates authority. If a document feels serious enough, people assume it must be correct. Questioning it feels risky. Arguing against it feels irresponsible. Rome understood that clarity invites debate, but confusion encourages compliance. The most Roman part is how society defends this system. When someone says they do not understand a legal document, the response is rarely sympathy. It is usually, "You should have read it more carefully," as if the problem is literacy, not design. Even lawyers acknowledge this quietly. Legal language protects institutions first, individuals second. That principle has not changed in 2,000 years. So when you struggle through a document that seems deliberately hostile to comprehension, remember, you are not stupid. You are experiencing a Roman tradition meant to remind you that power speaks in a language you are not expected to question. And somehow, we still call this progress. Ancient Rome loved big buildings, not because they were always necessary, not because they were efficient, but because they were impressive, overwhelming, and slightly unsettling. Rome understood something fundamental about power. If a building makes you feel small, the institution inside it feels important. Courthouses, basilicas, temples, forums. They were massive on purpose. High ceilings, endless columns, stone everywhere. You were supposed to walk in, look around, and immediately think, I should behave myself here. Architecture was not decoration. It was psychology. If you entered a Roman government building, the space reminded you who was in charge before anyone said a word. The size alone communicated authority. You did not argue loudly in these places. You did not feel confident. You waited quietly and hoped your business concluded quickly. And once again, we copied this rule almost perfectly. Modern government buildings still favor scale over comfort. Wide steps, tall facades, echoing halls, furniture that feels slightly hostile to human backs. Even corporate headquarters follow the same logic. Glass towers, endless lobbies, security desks that look like altars to bureaucracy. None of this is accidental. Big buildings signal permanence. They suggest power that will outlast you. When something looks ancient, solid, and immovable, people are less likely to question it. Rome understood that authority feels more legitimate when it is surrounded by stone. What makes this especially Roman is how uncomfortable these spaces often are. Waiting rooms feel cold, offices feel distant, seating feels temporary. You are not meant to settle in. You are meant to feel like a visitor in someone else's domain. And it works. People behave differently in imposing spaces. They speak softer. They move carefully. They accept decisions they might question elsewhere. Rome turned architecture into a silent enforcer, and we still let it do the same job today. The irony is that many of these buildings house systems that could operate perfectly well in smaller, friendlier spaces. But friendliness does not command obedience. Size does. So the next time you walk into a massive official building and feel inexplicably tense, remember, this sensation is not accidental. It is a Roman tradition designed to make authority feel inevitable. And it has been working for over 2,000 years. Ancient Rome believed work was not just something you did to survive, it was a moral statement. To be busy was to be virtuous. To rest too much was suspicious. Idleness, in Roman eyes, was not relaxation. It was a warning sign that you might start thinking dangerous thoughts. This belief made perfect sense for an empire built on conquest, agriculture, and unpaid labor. Rome needed people moving, producing, obeying schedules, and staying exhausted enough to avoid questioning the system. Work kept citizens useful and distracted. Rest created space for reflection, and reflection had a habit of turning into criticism. So Romans praised hard work loudly and constantly. Philosophers wrote about duty. Politicians glorified labor. Citizens were expected to fill their days with tasks, responsibilities, and obligations. Leisure was allowed, but only in controlled forms. Baths, games, festivals, all carefully structured and socially acceptable. Doing nothing, however, was deeply frowned upon, and somehow this idea survived intact. Today, work is still treated as a measure of personal worth. Being busy earns praise. Being tired earns respect. Admitting you are resting invites judgment. People brag about long hours the way Romans once bragged about military service. Productivity has replaced virtue, but the moral weight remains the same. The most Roman part of all is the guilt. When you are not working, you often feel like you should be, even when there is nothing urgent to do, even when rest would clearly improve your health. That quiet discomfort is Rome whispering across centuries that your value depends on your output. Rome did not invent hard work, but it did invent the idea that constant labor makes you a better person. And once society accepts that belief, people begin policing themselves. No overseer needed, no chains required, just internalized pressure. The irony is that Rome itself depended on massive amounts of leisure. For the wealthy, senators debated philosophy. Elites enjoyed long dinners and extended vacations. Meanwhile, everyone else absorbed the moral duty to stay productive. The rule applied unevenly, but it applied strongly. Modern society follows the same pattern. Rest is permitted, but only after productivity, only when earned, only when justified. So the next time you feel uneasy for doing absolutely nothing, remember, This guilt is not natural. It is Roman, and it has been controlling behavior for a very long time. Ancient Rome loved one thing almost as much as order: knowing exactly where everyone stood. Roman society was layered like a very unforgiving cake. Senators at the top, equestrians below them, citizens below that, freedmen somewhere in between, slaves at the bottom. Everyone had a place, and Rome was extremely clear that staying in your place was a civic duty. This hierarchy was not subtle. It shaped where you lived, what you wore, who you could marry, how loudly you were allowed to speak, and whether your opinion mattered at all. Questioning the hierarchy was not considered bravery. It was considered confusion. Rome did not waste time pretending this system was fair. It was stable. And stability, Rome believed, mattered more than justice. A rigid hierarchy reduced friction. People knew who to obey, who to ignore, and who to blame when something went wrong. And somehow, we kept this rule almost perfectly intact. Modern society insists it is equal, open, and flexible, but quietly maintains layers everywhere. Job titles, income brackets, education levels, social circles, online status. None of these hierarchies are officially declared, but everyone instinctively understands them. You feel them the moment you enter a room. The most Roman part is how uncomfortable people become when these hierarchies are questioned. Pointing out inequality is often treated as more disruptive than the inequality itself. Suggesting that rank should not determine respect is seen as naive. Rome would have appreciated that efficiency. Rome also taught us to internalize hierarchy. People police themselves. They hesitate to speak. They second-guess whether they are qualified to contribute. They assume silence is safer than challenge. This is not humility, it is training. Even today, success often depends less on talent and more on navigating invisible ladders, knowing when to speak, knowing when to stay quiet, knowing who matters, knowing who does not. Rome did not invent this instinct, but it perfected it. And here is the quiet truth Rome never advertised. Hierarchies persist because they feel natural once people stop questioning them. They become background structure. Like gravity, you notice them only when you fall, so the next time you feel like you are not supposed to speak up, question a rule or challenge a decision, remember, that hesitation did not come from logic. It came from Rome. And it is still very good at keeping people in line. Ancient Rome loved manners, not because Romans were especially kind, warm, or considerate, but because politeness was a form of control. Proper greetings, formal gestures, and carefully scripted phrases helped keep social order intact. If everyone followed the ritual, no one had to say what they actually thought. Romans were extremely particular about how you greeted someone. Who spoke first mattered. How you addressed them mattered. Which titles you used mattered. Even body language was regulated. A greeting was not just a courtesy. It was a public acknowledgement of hierarchy. You did not simply say hello. You performed respect. This made social interactions predictable, safe, exhausting. And somehow we kept this system almost unchanged. Today, you still say phrases you do not mean. How are you? When you do not want an answer. Nice to meet you, when you already forgot the person's name. With all due respect, when you are about to offer none. These phrases function exactly like Roman greetings. They smooth interactions without requiring honesty. The Roman genius was realizing that politeness rituals reduce conflict by avoiding sincerity. If everyone sticks to the script, no one has to risk discomfort. Feelings stay buried. Power stays unchallenged. Conversations remain shallow enough to manage. What makes this especially Roman is how uncomfortable people become when the ritual is broken. Answer, "How are you?" honestly, and the room freezes. Skip a greeting and suddenly you are rude. Speak too directly and you are labelled difficult. The system punishes authenticity not because it is wrong, but because it disrupts the performance. Rome trained people to value appearance over intention. Respect was shown through form, not action. Saying the right words mattered more than doing the right thing. This belief carried forward beautifully into modern professional culture, where tone often matters more than truth. And of course, politeness rituals reinforce hierarchy. You speak differently to superiors than to equals. You soften language upward and sharpen it downward. Rome would have applauded the efficiency. So the next time you find yourself smiling, nodding and exchanging pleasant phrases while thinking something entirely different, remember, this is not social grace. It is a Roman communication system designed to keep interactions controlled, emotions muted, and power comfortably unexamined. And you perform it every day without realizing it. Ancient Rome believed authority was not something you merely had, it was something you performed. Power needed a costume, a posture, and a facial expression that suggested absolutely no jokes would be tolerated. If authority looked relaxed, Rome assumed it would be challenged. So authority was trained to look severe, distant, and permanently disappointed. Roman officials wore specific garments, sat in elevated chairs, and spoke in rigid formal language. Smiling too much was suspicious. Laughing at the wrong moment was dangerous. The message was clear. If you appear approachable, people might forget to fear you. And fear, Rome believed, was far more reliable than affection. This rule survived beautifully. Today, authority still wears seriousness like armor. Judges, executives, officials, and leaders are expected to look composed, controlled, and emotionally restrained. Too much warmth reads as weakness. Too much humor reads as incompetence. A serious face suggests competence even when none is present. The most Roman part of this tradition is how quickly people lose trust in leaders who appear human. Show uncertainty and confidence drops. Show emotion and respect fades. Smile too often and suddenly you are not professional. Rome trained society to associate gravity with credibility, and we never unlearned it. Even language reflects this. Official speech is stiff, formal, and heavy with unnecessary complexity. Simple explanations sound unofficial. Casual language sounds risky. Rome understood that complexity creates distance, and distance creates authority. Architecture reinforces this rule as well. Authority figures are elevated, physically separated, or placed behind desks, podiums, and barriers. These are not practical choices, they are psychological ones. Rome taught us that power must feel inaccessible to remain powerful. And perhaps the strangest part is how willingly people accept this performance. We feel comforted when authority looks stern. We assume seriousness equals competence. When leaders joke, relax, or admit uncertainty, discomfort spreads through the room. Rome did not want leaders to be relatable. It wanted them to be unquestionable. So the next time you feel uneasy around someone simply because they look official, speak formally, or never smile, remember, this reaction is not instinct. It is Roman conditioning. Authority is not required to be kind, effective, or wise, only serious. And that illusion is still doing most of the work. This is ancient Rome's greatest achievement. Not aqueducts, not roads, not concrete. This. The rule that survives everything. We do it this way because it has always been done this way. Rome ran on tradition. When asked why a rule existed, the answer was rarely logical. It was historical. Because our ancestors did it. Because it worked before. Because changing it would feel uncomfortable. Tradition was treated like evidence. Age became proof. And that mindset outlived the empire. Today, countless rules govern your life without justification. Procedures no one remembers the origin of. Customs that survive audits, reforms, and common sense. Meetings that exist because meetings once existed. Forms that ask for information already provided elsewhere. Rules defended not with reason, but with the phrase, "That's just the way it works," which is Roman shorthand for, "Do not ask questions." Rome understood something deeply unsettling. If a rule lasts long enough, people stop questioning it. They stop asking who benefits. They stop imagining alternatives. Tradition becomes invisible, and invisible rules are the strongest kind. This is why systems often feel ancient, even when they are modern. You can remove emperors, senators, togas, and Latin, but if you keep the mindset, the structure remains. People obey not because they are forced to, but because deviation feels wrong. The most Roman part is how resistance is framed. Anyone who questions tradition is labeled disruptive, unrealistic, or difficult. Rome loved stability. Stability required silence. Change invited chaos. And chaos, Rome believed, was worse than inefficiency. So rules accumulate, layer upon layer. Nobody removes them because nobody remembers adding them. Over time, systems become museums of outdated logic, still operating long after their original purpose vanished. And yet, people follow them, faithfully, quietly, automatically. That is Rome's real legacy. Not domination by force, but domination by habit. So when you follow a rule you cannot explain, obey a procedure that makes no sense, or accept a custom simply because everyone else does, remember, you are not being practical. You are participating in a Roman tradition so successful it no longer needs justification. And somewhere in the ruins of the Forum, tradition smiles, because it won again. Nefertiti enters history not as a child, not as a princess in training, but as a fully realized presence, already powerful, already visible, already astonishing. Unlike most figures of Egypt's royal line, her beginnings are almost completely hidden. No childhood scenes carved into temple walls. No clear genealogy tracing her bloodline back through noble houses. She steps into the record suddenly, like a figure emerging from desert heat, leaving historians to argue over where she came from and who she truly was before she became queen. Her name itself offers the first clue, and the first mystery. Nefertiti means the beautiful one has come, a phrase that sounds less like a birth name and more like an announcement. It suggests arrival, transformation, even destiny. Some scholars have proposed that she was foreign-born, perhaps from the Mitanni kingdom to the north, sent to Egypt as part of a diplomatic marriage. Others argue she was Egyptian, possibly related to powerful court officials, raised close enough to the throne to understand its rituals, language, and dangers. No theory has ever been proven beyond doubt. What makes this silence so striking is how quickly it ends. Once Nefertiti appears beside the future pharaoh Akhenaten, she is everywhere. She is not a background wife, not a decorative consort. From the earliest reliefs, she stands tall, equal in scale to the king, participating in ceremonies traditionally reserved for pharaohs alone. This sudden prominence suggests that whatever her origins were, she arrived at court already prepared for power. Egyptian queens before her had influence, but usually behind the scenes. Nefertiti is different. She is visible, named, celebrated. Artists carve her likeness again and again, refining her features with obsessive care: high cheekbones, elegant neck, calm, unreadable eyes. Beauty in her case is not softness, it is authority rendered in human form. The absence of her early life has only amplified her legend. With no childhood to anchor her, Nefertiti becomes timeless, almost symbolic. She is not remembered for where she came from, but for how completely she transformed the role of queen once she arrived. From the moment she steps into the historical record, she is no longer becoming something. She already is something, and Egypt will soon begin to change around her. When Nefertiti becomes queen, she does so beside one of the most radical rulers Egypt would ever know, Akhenaten. Born Amenhotep IV, her husband would soon abandon centuries of tradition and drag the entire kingdom into a spiritual experiment that shocked priests, nobles, and common people alike. And Nefertiti was not merely present for this upheaval. She stood at its very center. From the earliest years of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti appears beside him in official art with unprecedented prominence. She is shown wearing the tall blue crown, a symbol usually reserved for kings. She performs ritual offerings directly to the sun god Aten. In some reliefs, she even smites enemies, a pose almost exclusively associated with pharaohs. This is not symbolic flattery. In ancient Egypt, imagery was power. To be carved this way was to be this way. Together, Akhenaten and Nefertiti dismantle Egypt's traditional religious order. The old gods, Amun, Osiris, Isis, are sidelined or erased. Temples are closed, priesthoods stripped of influence. In their place rises Aten, the visible sun disk, whose rays end in tiny hands offering life. This shift is not subtle. It is loud, aggressive, and deeply unsettling to a society built on cosmic balance and ancestral tradition. Nefertiti's role in this revolution is unmistakable. She is consistently depicted as Akhenaten's equal partner, not his subordinate. While previous queens supported cults quietly, Nefertiti embodies this new faith publicly. She and the king appear together in intimate family scenes beneath Aten's rays, presenting themselves as the sole intermediaries between God and people. Power flows through them alone. This partnership suggests something extraordinary. Nefertiti is not just a queen supporting her husband's vision, she is a co-architect of it. Her intelligence, charisma, and commanding presence help legitimize a religious shift that would otherwise seem reckless. If Akhenaten is the visionary, Nefertiti is the stabilizing force, the face that makes the revolution palatable. Yet this closeness carries danger. By tying her identity so tightly to Akhenaten's heresy, Nefertiti binds her fate to a fragile experiment. If the revolution fails, she will not be remembered as a passive consort, but as a central figure in Egypt's greatest religious gamble. And as the court relocates to a brand new capital in the desert, the stakes, political, spiritual, and personal, begin to rise rapidly. The religious revolution championed by Nefertiti and Akhenaten does not remain confined to temples and rituals. It reshapes the very landscape of Egypt. In a dramatic act of defiance against tradition, the royal couple abandons the old capitals and orders the construction of an entirely new city, Amarna. Rising from an empty stretch of desert, the city is meant to be a physical manifestation of their new faith, pure, untainted, and devoted solely to the sun disk Aten. For Nefertiti, Amarna becomes both a stage and a test. Here, freed from the weight of ancient priesthoods and entrenched elites, she appears more powerful than ever. Reliefs from the city show her in intimate domestic scenes, riding chariots, kissing her daughters, and worshipping beneath the open sky. The art style itself changes. Figures are elongated, expressive, almost fragile. Royal life is no longer distant and eternal. It is personal, human, and exposed to light. Nefertiti thrives in this environment. She is not hidden behind palace walls. She is visible in public ceremonies, wearing elaborate crowns and robes, her presence radiating authority. Unlike earlier queens who operated quietly, Nefertiti's power is on display. The city's layout reinforces this. Temples have no roofs, allowing sunlight to flood every ritual space. There are no dark sanctuaries, no secrets. Everything, like the queen herself, exists under constant illumination. But Amarna is also fragile. It has no deep roots, no ancestral graves, no centuries of tradition to stabilize it. The people who move there do so out of obligation, not devotion. Many priests resent the loss of their gods. Officials whisper doubts. Foreign powers watch closely, sensing weakness in a kingdom distracted by theology. Within this tension, Nefertiti's role grows more complex. She appears not only as a religious figure, but as a symbol of continuity. Her calm, controlled image contrasts sharply with the anxiety beneath the surface of the new capital. If Akhenaten's vision feels radical and unsettling, Nefertiti's presence reassures, at least visually, that order still exists. Yet the city of the sun is unforgiving. It allows no shadows and no place to hide failure. As the years pass, cracks begin to show: diplomatic neglect, unrest at home, and an increasingly isolated royal family. Amarna, once a bold declaration of divine truth, starts to resemble something else entirely. A beautiful experiment balanced dangerously on the edge of collapse. As the years in the city of the sun pass, Nefertiti's image evolves from powerful queen to something far more symbolic. She becomes not only a ruler and religious figure, but a carefully constructed embodiment of the new cosmic order. In Amarna art, she is no longer simply beside the king. She is central, sometimes even dominant, shown performing rituals alone, receiving divine rays directly, or standing at the center of family compositions beneath the sun. Motherhood plays a critical role in this transformation. Nefertiti bears 6 daughters, and they appear constantly in royal imagery. The family is shown touching, laughing, mourning, and worshipping together. This intimacy is unprecedented in Egyptian royal art, which traditionally emphasized distance and eternal perfection. Here, Nefertiti is not a remote goddess. She is visibly human, yet elevated. Her fertility, devotion, and composure merge into a single message. She is the living proof that a ten's order brings harmony and life. At the same time, her visual presence becomes increasingly idealized. Artists refine her face to near perfection, smoothing away age, exhaustion, and doubt. The famous bust created in this period captures this duality perfectly, serene and flawless, yet unsettlingly calm. It is not a portrait of a woman at rest, but of an icon carefully shaped for eternity. Nefertiti's beauty is no longer personal. It is political. This elevation carries a heavy cost. To be depicted as a living conduit of divine order means losing the protection of anonymity. Any failure of the new religion, any misfortune suffered by Egypt, reflects directly on her. As crops struggle and foreign territories slip from Egyptian control, whispers begin to circulate. The sun god promises balance and prosperity, but reality feels increasingly unstable. Within the palace, grief also leaves its mark. One of Nefertiti's daughters dies young, an event immortalized in raw, emotional reliefs. The royal couple is shown mourning openly, their bodies bent in sorrow beneath a ten's indifferent rays. It is a rare admission that even divine rulers are not spared loss. By this stage, Nefertiti exists in a precarious space between woman and symbol. She is expected to reassure a nervous kingdom, embody divine favor, and remain flawless, all while the foundations beneath her world begin to erode. The more godlike her image becomes, the less room there is for error. And Egypt, quietly but relentlessly, is running out of patience. Then, almost without warning, Nefertiti begins to vanish. After years of constant visibility, her name and image abruptly fade from the historical record. Reliefs that once celebrated her presence fall silent. Inscriptions that carefully listed her titles stop mentioning her altogether. For a woman who had stood at the very center of Egypt's religious and political life, this disappearance is startling and deeply unsettling. Scholars have long debated what this silence means. One possibility is death. Disease was common in Amarna, and several members of the royal family are known to have died young. If Nefertiti died suddenly, the lack of a grand burial or official mourning would be unusual, but not impossible in a period already marked by instability. Yet no tomb, no mummy, no clear funerary inscription has ever been securely identified as hers. Another theory is far more provocative, that Nefertiti did not die at all, but transformed. Some evidence suggests she may have taken on a new identity late in Akhenaten's reign, possibly ruling alongside him, or even briefly as a pharaoh in her own right under a different name. This would explain her disappearance as queen, and the sudden appearance of a new ruler whose identity remains frustratingly unclear. If true, it would mean Nefertiti did not fall from power, but ascended beyond the role she had already redefined. There is also a darker possibility. As the Aten experiment faltered, blame had to fall somewhere. The radical religion had disrupted Egypt's balance, weakened its international standing, and angered powerful priesthoods. Nefertiti, as the most visible symbol of this revolution, may have been deliberately erased. In ancient Egypt, removal from records was a form of punishment more severe than death. To be forgotten was to be destroyed in the afterlife. What makes this chapter so haunting is the absence of certainty. Nefertiti does not exit history with drama or explanation. She dissolves into silence, leaving behind fragments, half-finished reliefs, and unanswered questions. For a culture obsessed with permanence, this erasure is deeply unnatural. Whether she died, ruled in secret, or was deliberately removed, Nefertiti's disappearance marks a turning point. The light that once bathed Amarna begins to dim, and with the queen gone, or hidden, Egypt's bold experiment starts to unravel, preparing the ground for a rapid and ruthless return to the old gods. With Nefertiti absent from the stage, the fragile world she helped build begins to collapse with alarming speed. Akhenaten's authority weakens, and the once confident vision of a ten-centered rule loses its grip on Egypt. The court at Amarna grows tense and uncertain. Officials who once praised the sun god now hedge their loyalties, sensing that the old order is waiting patiently to reclaim power. When Akhenaten dies, the revolution effectively dies with him. His successors move quickly to distance themselves from his legacy. The new king, the young Tutankhamun, abandons Amarna and restores the worship of the traditional gods. Temples to Amun are reopened. Priests regain their wealth and influence. The name of Aten is quietly pushed aside, treated less like divine truth and more like a dangerous mistake. In this political cleanup, memory itself becomes a battlefield. Akhenaten's name is chiseled from monuments, his statues are smashed or repurposed, and Nefertiti, once the radiant face of the new order, receives no official rehabilitation. Her legacy is neither openly condemned nor honored. Instead, it is left unresolved, suspended in historical limbo. This silence is telling. Egypt was skilled at rewriting its past, but it usually did so decisively. Villains were erased. Heroes were glorified. Nefertiti fits neither category neatly. To condemn her outright would require acknowledging her immense authority. To praise her would mean admitting the revolution had once been legitimate. So she is left in shadow, neither restored nor destroyed. Amarna itself is abandoned almost overnight. Palaces crumble, temples fall silent, and the desert reclaims the city. What was once the spiritual center of Egypt becomes a cautionary ruin. The people return to familiar rhythms, familiar gods, familiar certainties. Balance, or mat, is restored, but at the cost of forgetting one of the most extraordinary women ever to sit on Egypt's throne. Yet forgetting is never complete. Even as official memory erases her, fragments remain. Shattered reliefs, unfinished inscriptions, and rumors preserved by later generations of scribes. Nefertiti becomes a ghost in Egypt's historical consciousness, a reminder that, for a brief and dangerous moment, a queen stood almost equal to the gods and helped reshape the soul of an empire. Her absence after the revolution does not diminish her importance. If anything, it magnifies it. For only someone truly powerful could be so carefully, so quietly, left unresolved. Centuries pass, dynasties rise and fall, and Nefertiti remains buried in silence until her image returns with astonishing force. Unlike many forgotten queens, she is not resurrected through grand inscriptions or heroic chronicles, but through a single object, a sculpted face so striking that it reshapes her legacy overnight. Long after her name fades from memory, her likeness survives, intact, calm, and impossibly modern. The sculpture does something no text ever could. It restores individuality. Gone is the abstraction of titles and rituals. What remains is a woman rendered with precision and restraint. The elongated neck, the poised jawline, the eyes that seem alert yet distant. This is not the exaggerated symbolism of royal propaganda. It feels intimate, almost personal, as if the artist captured a moment when the queen allowed her public mask to settle naturally into place. What makes this survival so remarkable is contrast. The regime she helped build was deliberately dismantled. Its monuments were smashed, its theology condemned, its leaders erased. Yet this face escapes destruction. It suggests that even in an era of systematic forgetting, someone chose preservation over annihilation. Whether by accident or intent, Nefertiti's image slips through the cracks of history's purge. As generations encounter this likeness, Nefertiti is reborn in a new form, not as a political figure, but as an ideal. She becomes shorthand for elegance, mystery, and restrained power. Unlike other rulers remembered for conquest or cruelty, she is remembered for presence. The calm authority of her expression invites interpretation rather than commands obedience. This rebirth also reshapes how her life is understood. The face forces historians and viewers alike to reconsider her role. A woman capable of inspiring such refined artistry could not have been a passive participant in history. The sculpture implies intelligence, control, and self-awareness, qualities that align with her unusual prominence during one of Egypt's most turbulent eras. Ironically, the very thing that once endangered her, visibility, now preserves her. The revolution she helped lead collapses, but her image outlives it. Empires crumble, gods are replaced, cities return to dust. Yet Nefertiti's face remains quietly defiant, refusing to be forgotten. In the end, she achieves what every Egyptian ruler desired but few attained: a form of immortality untouched by politics. Not through monuments or prayers, but through recognition, again and again, by eyes separated from her by thousands of years. With Nefertiti's face returned to the world, a new conflict begins, one not fought with armies or priests, but with claims, laws, and silence. The sculpture's discovery in the early 20th century instantly elevates her from a forgotten queen to a global icon. Yet the object that restores her presence also sharpens the most painful question of all. Where is the rest of her? No confirmed tomb of Nefertiti has ever been found. Unlike other queens, she has no secure burial site, no identified mummy, no funerary texts guiding her soul through the afterlife. For ancient Egyptians, this absence is catastrophic. To be buried properly was not symbolic, it was essential. Without a body, the afterlife was uncertain. Without a tomb, remembrance was fragile. Nefertiti's physical disappearance is not just a historical mystery, it is a spiritual rupture. As Egypt enters the modern era, her image becomes a contested artifact. She is admired, reproduced, commercialized, and argued over. Egypt views her as a stolen daughter, removed during a period of unequal power and foreign control. Museums frame her as a masterpiece of human art, detached from the politics of how she left her homeland. Between these positions lies a deep ethical tension. Can an icon belong to the world if it was taken from its history? This dispute mirrors Nefertiti's own life. She existed at the center of power, yet ultimately lost control over how her legacy was handled. Just as her name was erased by later rulers, her body seems to have been hidden, moved, or deliberately obscured. Some theories suggest she was buried in secrecy to protect her remains during the religious backlash. Others propose her tomb was repurposed or destroyed. None can be proven. What remains undeniable is imbalance. We have her face, but not her story's ending. We have her image, but not her voice. Modern admiration cannot fill the void left by her missing burial, just as artistic beauty cannot replace historical justice. Nefertiti becomes a symbol of absence itself, a woman known everywhere, yet physically nowhere. Her unfinished story continues to provoke discomfort, because it reminds us that history is often shaped not by what survives, but by what is missing, and by who gets to decide what is kept, displayed, or returned. In this way, Nefertiti's mystery never truly ends. It simply changes hands, passing from ancient priests to modern curators, from royal erasure to global debate, still unresolved, still unsettled. Nefertiti's life closes not with certainty, but with resonance. Unlike rulers whose deaths define their legacy, she remains suspended between presence and absence, power and erasure. This unresolved ending is precisely what grants her endurance. History often remembers conclusions more clearly than beginnings, but in Nefertiti's case, it is the missing final chapter that keeps her alive. She lived at a rare crossroads of beauty, authority, and ideology. As queen, she reshaped the visual language of power. As a public figure, she stood nearly equal to a pharaoh during one of Egypt's most dangerous experiments. As a symbol, she outlived the gods she served and the system she helped build. Even when her name vanished from inscriptions, her impact lingered in the ruins of Amarna, and in the memory of a revolution Egypt tried desperately to forget. What makes Nefertiti extraordinary is not simply that she was influential, but that she was never safely categorized. She was not reduced to wife, mother, saint, or villain. She occupied all these roles at once, and then slipped beyond them. Later rulers could erase her name, but they could not replace the void she left behind. Her silence becomes its own form of power, In modern times, she exists in fragments, a face without a body, a reign without an ending, a queen without a tomb. Each fragment invites projection. To some, she is a feminist icon ahead of her time. To others, a political partner in religious extremism. To many, she is simply mystery made visible. None of these interpretations fully contain her, and that is her final triumph. Ancient Egyptians believed true immortality came through remembrance. Names spoken aloud, images preserved, stories repeated. By that measure, Nefertiti has succeeded beyond any ruler of her age. She is remembered not because history resolved her story, but because it failed to. Her legacy is not a monument or a dynasty. It is a question that refuses to fade. What happened to her? Why was she erased? How much power did she truly hold? Each generation asks again, and in doing so keeps her alive. Nefertiti does not belong solely to the past. She exists in the tension between what we know and what we will never know. And as long as that tension endures, so will she, beautiful, unfinished, and eternally present. Long before the wheel transformed the world, movement itself was one of humanity's greatest obstacles. Early societies lived within the limits of their own strength. If something was too heavy to carry, it was dragged. If it was too far away, it was left behind. Every journey across land demanded time, labor, and cooperation, and even then, distance imposed harsh boundaries on what people could achieve. Heavy materials, stone blocks, timber, grain stores, were constant problems. To move them, people relied on sledges pulled across dirt, sand, or mud, sometimes lubricated with water or animal fat to reduce friction. Others used round logs as rollers, placing them beneath loads and shifting them forward one by one. These methods worked, but slowly, and only over short distances. Progress was possible, but painfully inefficient. Because of this, geography dictated destiny. Settlements clustered tightly around rivers, coastlines, and fertile plains. Waterways became the primary arteries of trade, because floating cargo was far easier than hauling it across land. Boats carried what carts could not yet move. Entire economic systems grew around rivers, while inland travel remained limited and exhausting. This pre-wheel world shaped how civilizations developed. Cities stayed compact. Construction was constrained by what human and animal muscle could manage. Trade networks existed, but they were fragile and local. The idea of moving large quantities of goods regularly over long distances was simply unrealistic. Ambition was tempered by physics. What makes this period so important is not its primitiveness, but its ingenuity under constraint. People constantly searched for ways to reduce effort, smoother paths, better sled designs, stronger harnesses for animals. They understood friction as an enemy, even if they lacked the language to describe it. They were circling the solution without realizing it. The concept of rolling motion did exist in fragments. Logs rolled, stones rolled downhill. Children watched objects move in circles without resistance. But turning that observation into a controlled, repeatable technology required a leap of abstraction. It required seeing motion not as something to fight against, but something to harness. The wheel did not emerge because humans were suddenly smarter. It emerged because pressure made innovation unavoidable. Growing populations, expanding trade, and larger construction projects demanded a new answer to an old problem. Before the wheel, civilization moved, but slowly, cautiously, and always at the mercy of the ground beneath its feet. The wheel did not begin as a vehicle. Its first true revolution happened quietly, indoors, in workshops filled with wet clay and spinning hands. Long before carts or chariots appeared, craftsmen in Mesopotamia discovered that rotation itself could be controlled, and once controlled, it could be transformative. Early potters originally shaped vessels by hand, slowly building walls of clay coil by coil. Every bowl and jar required constant repositioning. The process was labor-intensive and inconsistent. Symmetry was difficult to achieve, and speed was limited by human patience. Then came a simple but radical idea. Place the clay on a flat surface that could rotate smoothly while the hands stayed still. The earliest potter's wheels were not lightweight spinners. They were heavy stone discs mounted on a pivot designed to store momentum. Once set in motion, they kept turning, allowing the potter to shape clay evenly and continuously. This changed everything. Suddenly, vessels could be produced faster, thinner, and with near-perfect symmetry. Pottery became standardized, reliable, and scalable. This mattered far beyond aesthetics. Pottery was essential to survival. It stored grain, water, oil, and beer. A more efficient way to produce containers meant more food could be preserved, transported, and traded. The potter's wheel quietly accelerated economic growth, even though it never left the workshop floor. What's crucial is the mental leap this invention required. The wheel here was not about movement through space, but about controlled rotation around a fixed axis. This was a new way of thinking. Motion no longer meant dragging or lifting, it meant spinning. Energy could be stored, transferred, and reused. The concept of rotational momentum entered human understanding, even if no one could yet explain it in words. This early wheel also introduced precision. For the first time, humans could produce objects that were nearly identical in shape and size. This predictability laid the groundwork for mass production, specialization, and trade consistency. A buyer knew what they were getting. A seller could promise quantity and quality. Most importantly, the potter's wheel proved something revolutionary. Circular motion could reduce effort while increasing output. It showed that work could be amplified by design rather than strength. The idea stayed confined to crafts for generations, but it did not disappear. Once humans realized that rotation could make creation easier, it was only a matter of time before they asked a far more dangerous question. If spinning could help us shape objects, could it also help us move the world itself? The leap from the potter's workshop to the open road was neither quick nor obvious. For generations, the wheel remained a stationary tool, useful, elegant, and confined. Turning a spinning disc into a means of transport required more than copying the potter's wheel. It demanded a new way of thinking about balance, weight, and terrain. The earliest transport wheels appear in the lands of ancient Sumer, where dense populations, active trade, and agricultural surplus created constant pressure to move heavy loads. Farmers needed to transport grain. Builders needed stone and timber. Merchants needed reliable ways to move goods inland, beyond rivers. Dragging sledges across dirt worked, but it wasted time, energy, and animals. The solution was not simply attaching a wheel to a load. Early engineers had to solve several problems at once. Wheels had to be strong enough to bear weight without cracking. Axles had to rotate smoothly while supporting heavy carts. The entire structure had to remain stable over uneven ground. These were not minor adjustments, they were breakthroughs. The first transport wheels were solid discs, cut from thick wooden planks and fixed directly to an axle. This made them durable but heavy. Carts moved slowly, creaking under their own mass, but the difference was dramatic. Loads that once required dozens of people could now be pulled by animals. Distance became manageable. Roads, once an afterthought, began to matter. This moment marks a quiet revolution. For the first time, land travel begins to compete with rivers. Trade routes expand. Villages that once lived in isolation become connected. Economic networks stretch outward, carrying not just goods, but ideas, customs, and technologies. Yet these early wheels were not universal solutions. They struggled on rocky terrain and steep slopes. Mud could trap them. Maintenance was constant. The wheel was powerful, but fragile. Its success depended on infrastructure, flattened paths, cleared roads, and trained animals. In other words, the wheel did not just change transport. It forced societies to reshape their landscapes. What's remarkable is how quickly the idea spread once proven. Variations of wheeled carts appear across regions, adapted to local needs and materials. The principle remains the same. Rotation replaces friction, effort multiplies, and movement accelerates. The wheel's journey from workshop to road marks the moment it escapes craftsmanship and enters civilization itself. It is no longer a tool for making things, it becomes a tool for moving societies, and once that happens, history begins to move faster with it. Once wheeled transport proved viable, its true power emerged only when paired with two other forces: animals and infrastructure. A wheel on its own could move a load, but a wheel pulled by trained animals across prepared paths could transform entire societies. This combination marks the moment when movement stopped being occasional and became routine. Oxen were among the first animals harnessed for wheeled carts. Strong, steady, and tolerant of slow speeds, they were ideal for hauling heavy agricultural goods. Later, donkeys and horses expanded what wheeled transport could do, especially over longer distances. With animals providing consistent pulling power, carts no longer relied solely on human labor. This freed people to specialize, trade, and settle farther from their fields. At the same time, roads began to matter in ways they never had before. A wheel performs best on firm, even ground. Rutted paths, rocks, and mud could snap axles or trap carts entirely. To keep goods moving, communities flattened earth, cleared stones, and eventually laid wooden planks or packed gravel. These early roads were not monumental projects, but they represented a shift in priorities. Movement was now worth investing in. This new mobility changed daily life. Farmers could bring surplus crops to distant markets. Craftsmen could sell their goods beyond their immediate village. Marriages, alliances, and cultural exchange expanded as travel became less punishing. Distance shrank, not physically, but practically. The wheel also reshaped time. Journeys that once took days of exhausting effort could now be completed more predictably. Schedules emerged. Trade became seasonal, then regular. Reliability replaced improvisation. For the first time, societies could plan around movement instead of merely enduring it. Yet this acceleration came with consequences. Roads concentrated traffic, making certain settlements wealthy while bypassing others. Control of routes became power. Those who maintained roads, bred animals, and owned carts gained economic advantage. Mobility, once rare, became stratified. The wheel did not create inequality, but it amplified it. Those with access moved faster, traded more, and accumulated influence. Those without remained tied to the land. Civilization sped up, but not evenly. By binding wheels to animals and roads, humans unlocked a new rhythm of life. The world became more connected, more ambitious, and more dependent on movement. The wheel was no longer just an invention, it was becoming an expectation, and once a society expects motion, standing still is no longer an option. The wheel's most dramatic transformation came when it left the fields and markets and entered warfare. What had begun as a tool for transport became an instrument of speed, shock, and domination. Nowhere was this shift more consequential than with the rise of the chariot. Early carts were slow and heavy, useful for hauling goods but unsuited for battle. Warfare demanded something different: lightness, balance, and speed. The solution was a refined wheel, smaller, lighter, and often spoked, mounted on a narrow frame pulled by fast animals. This innovation did not merely improve combat, it redefined it. Chariots allowed elites to move rapidly across the battlefield, firing projectiles, commanding troops, and retreating before enemies could respond. Mobility became power. Armies that mastered wheeled warfare gained a decisive advantage over slower, infantry-based forces. Control of terrain mattered less than control of motion. This technology reshaped political hierarchies. Chariots were expensive. They required skilled craftsmen, trained animals, and maintained roads or flat plains. As a result, chariot warfare became associated with kings, nobles, and warrior aristocracies. Power concentrated in the hands of those who could afford speed. Beyond the battlefield, the chariot became a symbol. Rulers were depicted riding in them, not because they needed to, but because the image conveyed dominance. A king in a chariot was a king who moved faster than his rivals, who struck where he wished, and who commanded the horizon itself. The wheel, once humble, was now wrapped in ideology. This militarization of the wheel also accelerated technological refinement. Lighter woods, better joinery, improved axles, and more durable rims all emerged from the demands of war. Each improvement spilled back into civilian life, making carts and wagons more efficient as well. Conflict, as so often in history, drove innovation, but the chariot had limits. It depended on flat land, trained animals, and constant upkeep. In rough terrain or dense forests, its advantage vanished. Over time, new forms of warfare and transport would replace it. Yet for centuries, the chariot represented the peak of wheeled technology, a perfect fusion of speed, engineering, and authority. Through war, the wheel gained something it had never possessed before: fear. It was no longer just a tool that carried goods. It carried power, conquest, and the ability to reshape borders. And once an invention becomes tied to domination, it is no longer optional. It becomes essential to survival. As wheeled technology matured, it became inseparable from empire. What once connected villages now bound vast territories together. Roads, carts, wagons, and supply trains allowed states to project power far beyond their original borders. An empire without wheels could conquer, but it could not hold. In the Mediterranean world, the Romans understood this better than anyone. Their roads were not simply paths, they were engineered systems designed for durability, drainage, and speed. Stone surfaces reduced friction and wear, allowing wheeled vehicles to move reliably in all seasons. Military wagons carried supplies, weapons, and siege equipment. Civilian carts moved grain, wine, and stone. The wheel turned conquest into administration. What mattered most was predictability. Wheeled transport allowed empires to calculate distance, time, and logistics. Armies could be supplied regularly. Taxes could be collected and redistributed. Governors could travel, messages could move, and laws could be enforced. The wheel quietly became the backbone of bureaucracy. A similar logic emerged in East Asia. In Han China, standardized axle widths were imposed so carts could fit the same road ruts. This detail seems small, but it reveals something profound. The wheel had become a matter of state policy. Infrastructure and technology were aligned to maximize movement across enormous distances. Roads were not local conveniences, they were instruments of unity. Yet wheeled empires were also fragile. Roads required maintenance, carts broke, animals aged. When central authority weakened, infrastructure decayed quickly. As roads fell into disrepair, movement slowed, trade shrank, and control loosened. Empires that had once relied on wheels found themselves trapped by their absence. This dependence reveals the wheel's double edge. It empowered states to expand, but it also created systems that required constant upkeep. When that upkeep failed, collapse accelerated. The same roads that once carried order could just as easily carry invaders, or fall silent entirely. By this stage, the wheel was no longer an innovation. It was invisible. People did not marvel at it, they assumed it. Carts were expected, roads were expected. Mobility became part of how power was imagined. A ruler who could not move goods, troops, and information was no ruler at all. The wheel had completed its transformation. From a workshop tool to a weapon, from a convenience to a necessity, it now shaped how empires lived and died. Civilization did not merely use the wheel anymore, it depended on it, and that dependence would shape the future just as surely as invention once had. By the time empires rose and fell on wheels, the invention had begun to do something even more profound. It collapsed distance. What once separated cultures by weeks of effort now separated them by days. The wheel did not just move goods, it moved ideas, beliefs, technologies, and people, quietly weaving the world together. Overland trade routes expanded dramatically as wheeled transport became reliable. Caravans of carts carried grain, textiles, metals, and tools across regions that had once been economically isolated. These routes did not replace rivers or sea travel, but they filled the gaps between them, creating continuous networks of exchange. Inland settlements that had once been peripheral became vital links in long-distance trade. Nowhere is this clearer than along the vast commercial arteries later known as the Silk Road. While camels and pack animals played a major role, wheeled transport handled enormous volumes of goods at regional levels, feeding into and out of these long routes. Wheels carried silk to depots, grain to caravan hubs, and manufactured goods to ports. Trade became layered, systematic, and resilient. This movement reshaped societies from the inside. Merchants gained power and status. Cities grew around crossroads rather than just rivers. Warehouses, markets, inns, and repair workshops became common features of urban life. Entire professions emerged to serve movement: wheelwrights, road builders, carters, and animal trainers. The economy no longer revolved solely around production. It revolved around circulation. Culturally, the effects were just as dramatic. Religious ideas traveled with merchants. Artistic styles blended. Technologies spread faster than ever before. A cart rolling into a town could bring new tools, new stories, and new ways of thinking. The wheel became an unspoken messenger, carrying more than it seemed. Yet this shrinking world also brought tension. Faster movement meant faster competition. Local crafts faced pressure from distant producers. Diseases traveled more easily. Conflict spread along the same routes as trade. Connection brought opportunity, but also vulnerability. By enabling regular, predictable overland travel, the wheel permanently altered how humans understood space. Distance was no longer a fixed barrier, it was a problem to be solved. And once a society learns that distance can be overcome, it begins to imagine larger worlds, broader identities, and greater ambitions. At this stage, the wheel was no longer just supporting civilization, it was accelerating it. The world felt smaller, busier, and more interconnected than ever before, and there would be no turning back. For all its power, the wheel was never universal. Its success depended on terrain, infrastructure, and maintenance. And when any of these failed, the wheel quickly revealed its limits. In many parts of the world, wheeled transport struggled or disappeared entirely, reminding humanity that even transformative inventions are not invincible. Rough landscapes were the wheel's greatest enemy. Dense forests, steep mountains, deserts, and marshlands made carts more of a burden than a benefit. In such environments, pack animals, sleds, or human porters proved more reliable. Wheels sank into mud, shattered on rocks, or became impossible to repair far from workshops. Where roads could not be built or maintained, the wheel simply could not compete. This is why some advanced societies made limited use of wheeled transport, despite understanding it perfectly well. In regions of the Americas, for example, civilizations mastered mathematics, astronomy, and architecture, yet relied on foot travel and pack animals rather than carts. The issue was not intelligence or imagination, it was practicality. Without suitable animals to pull carts or landscapes that supported roads, the wheel offered little advantage. Even in places where wheels had once thrived, decline could come swiftly. When empires collapsed, roads fell apart. Without centralized authority to maintain infrastructure, wheeled movements slowed and then stopped. Carts broke down and were not replaced. Trade routes fragmented. Local economies turned inward. The same invention that had once unified vast territories could vanish within generations. This failure reveals an important truth. Technology does not move history forward on its own. It requires systems, political, economic, and social, to survive. The wheel flourished when societies invested in it. When they stopped, it faded quietly into the background. Yet these periods of decline did not erase the wheel's legacy. The knowledge remained. The idea persisted, waiting for conditions to change. When stability returned, wheels returned with it, often improved by lessons learned from past failures. The wheel's vulnerability also shaped human adaptability. People learned to choose the right tool for the right environment. In some places, wheels ruled. In others, they stepped aside. Civilization did not advance in a straight line. It adapted, retreated, and re-emerged. By confronting the limits of the wheel, humanity gained something just as valuable as speed: understanding. The realization that no invention is absolute, and that progress depends as much on context as on creativity, would shape every technological leap that followed. The wheel's greatest achievement is not that it was invented, but that it endured. Long after empires collapsed and roads crumbled, the idea of the wheel never disappeared. It waited, resurfaced, and adapted, quietly shaping every era that followed. Few inventions have proven so flexible, so resilient, or so deeply woven into human life. Over time, the wheel escaped its wooden origins. Iron rims strengthened it, spokes refined it, bearings reduced friction, carts became wagons, wagons became carriages, and carriages eventually gave way to machines that no ancient engineer could have imagined. Yet the principle remained unchanged: controlled rotation turning effort into motion. What makes the wheel extraordinary is how it multiplied everything it touched. Agriculture expanded because harvests could be moved. Cities grew because supplies could reach them. Trade flourished because distance became negotiable. Warfare intensified because speed became lethal. Administration hardened because movement became predictable. The wheel did not cause civilization, but it accelerated every force already pushing it forward. Even more profound is how invisible the wheel became. Once revolutionary, it faded into assumption. People stopped seeing it as technology and began treating it as nature. This invisibility is the mark of true transformation. When an invention disappears into daily life, it has succeeded completely. The modern world still rests on the wheel's logic. Factories spin, turbines turn, gears mesh. Data itself moves through systems designed around rotational principles. Even in digital space, the language of cycles, loops, and revolutions persists. The wheel taught humanity how to think in motion. And yet, the wheel also carries a warning. It reminds us that progress is not inevitable. It depends on care, infrastructure, and balance. Roads must be maintained. Systems must be supported. When movement stops, societies fragment. The wheel gives speed, but it demands responsibility. Looking back, the invention of the wheel was not a single moment of genius. It was a slow realization, built from observation, pressure, and necessity. It emerged because humans refused to accept friction as destiny. They wanted to move farther, faster, and with less pain. And they reshaped the world to do it. The wheel never promised wisdom or justice. It offered possibility. What humanity chose to carry on it, food or weapons, ideas or domination, was always a matter of choice. Still, once the wheel began to turn, history itself began to roll forward, and it has never truly stopped. In the ancient world, sleep was not a retreat from reality, it was an entrance into another one. When the body lay still and the eyes closed, something else was believed to awaken. The soul loosened its grip on the physical world and drifted into a realm where God spoke, spirits warned, and the future revealed itself in fragments. To dream was not passive, it was an experience, sometimes gentle, sometimes terrifying, always meaningful. Ancient people did not draw a firm line between waking life and dreaming life. Both were governed by forces beyond human control. The same gods who ruled the sky, the harvest, and the throne were thought to rule the night as well. Dreams were not accidents of the mind. They were messages delivered when the defenses of reason were lowered. Because dreams arrived uninvited, they carried authority. A king could ignore advice from counselors, but a dream sent by a god was harder to dismiss. A farmer might doubt rumors, but a vision in sleep felt personal, intimate, and urgent. Dreams were believed to bypass lies. They spoke in symbols because the divine language was not meant to be heard plainly. This belief made sleep a vulnerable act. To close one's eyes was to open oneself to influence. Nightmares were not meaningless fears. They were signs of imbalance, angered gods, or approaching disaster. Pleasant dreams were blessings, reassurances that order still held. Even confusing dreams mattered, because confusion itself was a signal that something unseen was stirring. Morning did not end the dream's power. Upon waking, people replayed visions carefully, searching for patterns, omens, and clues. A single image, a falling star, a broken tooth, a flood, could shape decisions for days or years. Wars were delayed, journeys were cancelled, marriages were approved or forbidden. Dreams altered real outcomes. What made dreams especially powerful was their ambiguity. They rarely spoke directly. Instead, they demanded interpretation. This created a class of specialists, priests, seers, and elders trained to read symbols and translate the language of sleep. Their authority rested on the belief that dreams came from beyond the dreamer, and therefore required guidance to understand. In this world, Sleep was not empty time. It was active, risky, and sacred. Each night carried the possibility of revelation. To lie down was to accept that the universe might speak back. And when it did, ancient minds listened closely, because dreams were never considered meaningless, and silence in sleep was far more frightening than a message. In ancient Mesopotamia, dreams were treated as direct communications from the divine realm. The Sumer and later Babylonian cultures believed the gods rarely spoke plainly in waking life, but at night, when the mind was unguarded, they could finally be heard. Dreams were not symbols invented by the sleeper. They were messages sent. Mesopotamian gods were active, emotional, and easily offended. They rewarded obedience and punished neglect. Dreams were one of their preferred tools. A dream might warn of an approaching flood, announce a coming illness, or signal divine displeasure. To ignore such a message was dangerous. To misinterpret it could be catastrophic. Clay tablets preserve some of the earliest dream manuals ever written. These texts catalogued dream images and their meanings with remarkable confidence. To dream of losing teeth might foretell the death of a relative. To dream of flying could mean divine favor, or impending downfall, depending on context. Nothing was random. Every detail mattered. Kings took dreams especially seriously. A ruler's dream was not private. It belonged to the state. If a king dreamed of collapse, invasion, or darkness, priests were summoned immediately. Rituals followed to appease the gods or redirect fate. Sacrifices were made, festivals altered. Sometimes policies changed overnight, all because of something seen in sleep. What made Mesopotamian dream culture distinctive was its urgency. Dreams were not philosophical puzzles. They were warnings with deadlines. A dream delayed was a message ignored, and ignored gods were dangerous gods. This created a constant atmosphere of vigilance. Night was never neutral. Priests served as intermediaries between dreamers and deities. Their role was not to comfort, but to decode accurately. A wrong interpretation could anger the gods further. As a result, dream reading became formalized, cautious, and deeply conservative. Ancient interpretations were trusted more than personal intuition. Tradition mattered more than creativity. Dreams also reinforced hierarchy. Ordinary people received dreams, but only elites had access to trained interpreters. Power flowed through interpretation. Whoever controlled the meaning of dreams controlled fear, hope, and obedience. In Mesopotamia, sleep was a negotiation with the gods. Every night carried the risk of divine intrusion, and every morning began with a question that could shape an entire life. What did the gods show me while I slept? In ancient Egypt, dreams were not merely messages, they were journeys. Egyptians believed the human soul was made of multiple parts, and during sleep, some of these elements could separate from the body and travel freely. Dreams occurred when the soul crossed into hidden realms, where gods, ancestors, and spirits resided. Unlike the often threatening dreams of Mesopotamia, Egyptian dreams were more ambiguous. They could be warnings, but they could also be guidance, reassurance, or healing. Sleep placed a person closer to the divine world, where truth was not bound by time. The future, the past, and the unseen could blend freely. Egyptians recorded dream interpretations in manuals similar to those of Mesopotamia, but with a distinct tone. Dreams were divided into good and bad, and interpretations often reflected moral balance rather than punishment. A dream of clear water might promise renewal. A dream of decay could signal imbalance in one's spiritual life. Dreams reflected harmony, or its absence. One of the most important dream practices in Egypt was incubation. Individuals deliberately slept in sacred spaces, such as temples, hoping to receive a dream from a god. This was especially common in healing cults. A sick person might sleep near a shrine and dream of a god prescribing a cure. The dream itself was considered part of the healing process. Egyptian gods were believed to appear in dreams, not as distant forces, but as familiar presences. Deities could offer protection, advice, or warnings, often through symbolic imagery rather than speech. A god appearing calmly was a good sign. A chaotic or silent god suggested danger. Dreams also played a role in state affairs. Pharaohs were thought to receive divine guidance in sleep, reinforcing their role as intermediaries between gods and humans. A dream could justify a building project, a military decision, or a ritual reform. Because the pharaoh embodied divine order, his dreams carried cosmic weight. At the same time, ordinary Egyptians also trusted their dreams. Amulets were worn to protect against bad dreams. Household rituals sought peaceful sleep. Nightmares were believed to be caused by malevolent spirits, not by the mind itself. In Egypt, dreams were woven into daily spirituality. They were not rare revelations, but regular encounters with the unseen. To dream was to touch the world beyond the body, and to wake was to return carrying traces of divine knowledge back into daylight. In ancient Greece, dreams began to shift in meaning. They were still divine, still powerful, but they were also increasingly symbolic. Greek thinkers did not abandon the idea that gods spoke through dreams. Instead, they asked how those messages worked and why they arrived in such strange, indirect forms. Early Greek tradition treated dreams as external visitations. In epic poetry attributed to Homer, dreams are sent deliberately by gods, entering the sleeper like messengers with instructions or deceptions. A dream could encourage a hero, mislead a king, or push events toward fate. These dreams were purposeful and sometimes manipulative, reflecting gods who interfered constantly in human affairs. Over time, Greek thought became more analytical. Philosophers began to notice that dreams rarely spoke clearly. Instead, they arrived as images, riddles, and emotional impressions. This raised a new question. If the gods wished to communicate, why not speak plainly? The answer many Greeks reached was that dreams required interpretation, because meaning itself was layered. Truth, they believed, was rarely simple. This idea gave rise to professional dream interpreters who focused not just on tradition, but on context. The dreamer's age, status, health, and recent actions all mattered. A snake in a dream could mean danger for one person and healing for another. Symbols were not fixed, they were relational. Nowhere was this belief stronger than in the healing sanctuaries of Asclepius. Pilgrims traveled long distances to sleep in his temples, practicing dream incubation, much like in Egypt. During sleep, the god was believed to appear and offer cures through symbolic acts, touching a wound, presenting an animal, or guiding the dreamer through a strange ritual. The dream itself was considered a form of treatment. Greek culture also recognized deceptive dreams. Not every dream was divine. Some were thought to arise from bodily imbalance, emotion, or excess food and wine. This distinction was crucial. It meant that dreams could be meaningful without always being sacred. The mind itself became part of the mystery. In Greece, dreams occupied a space between heaven and psychology. They were messages, but not always trustworthy ones. They revealed truth obliquely, forcing humans to think, interpret, and doubt. And in doing so, Greek dream culture laid the groundwork for a new idea, that the inner world of the mind mattered just as much as the gods who might speak through it. As ancient civilizations matured, dreams began to sit at the center of a growing tension. Were they messages from beyond, or reflections from within? This question did not erase belief in divine dreams, but it fractured how authority over them was claimed. Priests, prophets, and physicians all sought to define what dreams truly were, and who had the right to interpret them. In the Greek world, this divide became especially visible. Religious interpreters insisted that dreams were still gifts from the gods, but medical thinkers began to push back. Figures like Hippocrates argued that dreams could reveal the state of the body. According to this view, the images of sleep were symptoms. A dream of fire might signal fever. A dream of drowning might reflect breathing problems. The dream was not divine, it was diagnostic. This was a radical shift. Dreams were no longer only messages about fate or morality. They became clues about physical health. Physicians began asking patients about their dreams alongside their pains and fevers. Sleep turned into a source of data. The body spoke at night in images because it could not speak in words. Philosophers pushed the debate even further. Aristotle rejected the idea that most dreams came from gods at all. He argued that dreams were natural byproducts of sensation and memory. The mind, still active during sleep, replayed impressions from waking life. For Aristotle, the divine did not need dreams to communicate. Dreams belonged to the human organism. Yet even Aristotle did not fully strip dreams of meaning. He acknowledged that they could reveal hidden processes and unspoken fears. Dreams mattered, but not because gods sent them. They mattered because the mind never truly rested. This created an uneasy coexistence. Temples still practiced dream incubation. Oracles still listened to visions. But alongside them stood physicians and philosophers, offering competing explanations. A dream could be sacred, medical, or psychological, depending on who was asked. For ordinary people, the distinction mattered less than the effect. Dreams still influenced decisions, stirred anxiety, and demanded attention. A nightmare could send someone to a priest. A recurring dream might send them to a healer. Interpretation became choice. This chapter marks a turning point. Dreams were no longer owned by the gods alone. They became contested territory, shared by religion, medicine, and philosophy. And once that line was drawn, the ancient world would never dream in quite the same way again. In the ancient world, dreams were never purely personal. When interpreted publicly, they could shape laws, justify wars, and legitimize power. Nowhere was this more evident than in politics, where dreams became tools, carefully used, selectively shared, and sometimes deliberately fabricated. Rulers understood the authority dreams carried. A king who claimed divine instruction in a dream positioned himself above debate. Decisions were no longer political choices. They were obediences to fate. To challenge them was to challenge the gods themselves. Dreams offered rulers a way to bypass dissent while appearing humble before higher powers. In Mesopotamia, royal dreams were recorded, preserved, and ritualized. If a king dreamed of danger, it could justify emergency measures. If he dreamed of victory, it could signal divine approval for war. The interpretation mattered as much as the dream itself, and interpreters knew their influence. A single symbolic reading could alter the course of a campaign. Egyptian pharaohs used dreams more subtly. Because the pharaoh was already divine, his dreams reinforced cosmic order rather than justified radical change. A dream might confirm a temple's construction, validate a priesthood, or explain a disaster as part of divine balance. In this way, dreams protected authority by explaining uncertainty, not questioning it. Greek leaders were more cautious. Public skepticism toward dreams had grown, but their persuasive power remained. Politicians used dreams strategically, presenting them as omens when convenient and dismissing them when dangerous. A well-timed dream could rally troops, calm unrest, or sanctify a risky decision. This political use of dreams also produced suspicion. If dreams were powerful, they could be manipulated. False dream claims became a known tactic. Some leaders were accused of inventing visions to serve ambition. Others surrounded themselves with interpreters who told them only what they wished to hear. As a result, dreams became double-edged. They could inspire loyalty, but also distrust. A ruler too reliant on dreams appeared weak or delusional. One who ignored them risked seeming impious. Power required balance. Dreams had to be invoked sparingly, convincingly, and with the right audience. By this stage, dreams had fully entered the machinery of civilization. They were no longer just sacred experiences or personal revelations. They were instruments, capable of moving crowds, silencing opposition, and reshaping history. In the ancient mind, a dream spoken aloud could be as dangerous as an army, and those who controlled its meaning controlled more than sleep. They controlled belief itself. While kings and priests argued over the meaning of grand visions, most dreams in the ancient world belonged to ordinary people, and they mattered just as much. Farmers, merchants, soldiers, and mothers all lived in cultures where dreams were taken seriously, even when they were private and small. Not every dream predicted a war or a divine command. Many spoke instead to fear, hope, guilt, and survival. For common people, dreams were often practical. A bad dream before a journey might delay departure. A dream of abundance could encourage a risky investment or a marriage proposal. Nightmares were treated as warnings that something in daily life was out of balance. Illness, social conflict, or neglected rituals were all suspected causes. Dreams were not abstract philosophy. They were feedback. Protection against bad dreams was widespread. Amulets were worn to guard sleep. Short prayers were spoken before bed. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, written charms were placed near pillows to repel malevolent spirits believed to attack at night. Sleep was seen as a moment of exposure when the soul was less defended. Dream sharing was also common. Families discussed dreams at breakfast. Neighbors compared symbols. Elders offered advice based on memory and tradition. Even without access to professional interpreters, people relied on communal wisdom. Over time, shared interpretations became informal rules. Certain images were feared, others welcomed. In the Greek and Roman worlds, this everyday dream culture continued despite philosophical skepticism. Even those who accepted natural explanations for dreams still felt their emotional weight. A dream of loss could linger all day. A comforting dream of the dead could bring peace. Logic did not erase experience. Soldiers paid close attention to dreams. Before battles, dreams could raise morale or spread dread. A dream of defeat might be kept secret, while a dream of victory was shared widely. Dreams shaped confidence, and confidence shaped outcomes. Women, often excluded from formal religious authority, still held dream knowledge within households. Mothers interpreted children's dreams. Widows sought meaning in dreams of lost spouses. These interpretations rarely entered official records, but they shaped daily choices and emotional worlds. What stands out is consistency. Across civilizations, social classes, and belief systems, humans treated dreams as meaningful experiences. Even when their source was debated, their impact was not. Dreams influenced behavior because they felt real. This chapter reveals something essential. Ancient dream culture was not imposed from above. It was sustained from below. Dreams mattered because people felt them matter. And as long as sleep carried emotion, memory, and fear, ancient minds would continue to listen closely to what the night revealed. As trade routes expanded and empires collided, dreams began to travel too. Ideas about sleep, omens, and interpretation moved across borders, blending traditions that had once been separate. What emerged was not a single dream doctrine, but a shared ancient assumption. Dreams mattered, even if cultures disagreed on why. Mesopotamian dream manuals influenced neighboring regions, spreading the idea that symbols could be catalogued and decoded. Egyptian practices of dream incubation reached the Greek world, where they were adopted, adapted, and philosophically debated. Greek skepticism, in turn, filtered back east through conquest and cultural exchange, introducing doubt into systems once built on certainty. The expansion of the Persian Empire accelerated this exchange. Spanning multiple civilizations, it brought together dream traditions that ranged from rigid omen reading to more fluid symbolic interpretation. Administrators, soldiers, and priests encountered foreign dream beliefs and carried them home. Over time, no culture interpreted dreams helpfully without at least being aware of alternative explanations. Later, during the Hellenistic period, this fusion intensified. Greek philosophy merged with Near Eastern spirituality. Dreams could now be divine messages, bodily signals, or psychological echoes, all at once. Interpreters became more flexible. Certainty gave way to probability. Meaning became layered rather than fixed. This blending also exposed contradictions. One culture's good dream could be another's warning. A snake might symbolize healing in Greece, danger in Mesopotamia, or rebirth in Egypt. These conflicts did not destroy belief in dreams. They complicated it. People learned that interpretation depended not just on symbols, but on worldview. As a result, dream authority weakened, but deepened. No single priesthood could fully claim control. Individuals began weighing interpretations rather than obeying them blindly. Dreams still influenced decisions, but they were now debated, discussed, and contextualized. What survived across cultures was the emotional core. Fear, hope, grief, and desire appeared in dreams everywhere. No empire erased that. Even when meanings changed, the experience remained powerful. A dream of falling felt unsettling, whether it was divine or natural. A dream of reunion felt comforting, regardless of theology. This chapter marks a quiet transition. Dreams stop belonging entirely to gods or institutions and start belonging more clearly to humans themselves. Not because they lose mystery, but because mystery becomes shared. By crossing cultures, dreams lost some authority, but gained resilience. They could no longer be explained one way, but they could never be ignored either. By the end of antiquity, dreams had lost their single, unquestioned meaning, but they had not lost their power. They survived every philosophical challenge, every political manipulation, every cultural exchange. Even when ancient thinkers disagreed about what dreams were, they rarely questioned that dreams mattered. The night remained a space where certainty softened and deeper questions emerged. What ancient civilizations ultimately shared was not a unified theory of dreams, but a shared humility before them. Dreams resisted control. They arrived without permission, ignored social rank, and spoke in images rather than commands. Kings, priests, philosophers, and farmers all faced the same vulnerability when they slept. In that sense, dreams were one of the few truly universal human experiences. As formal religious authority weakened and rational explanations grew stronger, dreams quietly shifted roles. They moved from being external messages imposed by gods to internal experiences demanding reflection. This did not make them less meaningful, only more personal. Responsibility for interpretation slowly drifted from institutions to individuals. Yet even in this shift, the ancient legacy endured. The language of dreams remained symbolic. People still searched for patterns. They still woke with unease or relief, still felt that something important had happened during the night. The belief that dreams revealed hidden truth never fully disappeared. It simply changed shape. Ancient civilizations never solved dreams. They lived with them. They accepted contradiction, that dreams could be divine and bodily, meaningful and deceptive, personal and political. This acceptance may be their most enduring insight. Rather than forcing dreams into a single explanation, they allowed them to remain ambiguous. That ambiguity is why ancient dream culture still feels familiar. Modern minds may speak of psychology and neuroscience, but the instinct is the same. We still ask what a dream means. We still feel watched by the night. We still carry images from sleep into daylight, unsure why they matter, but certain that they do. The ancient world treated dreams as a bridge between gods and humans, body and soul, fear and hope. That bridge never collapsed. It was simply renamed, and every night, when consciousness loosens and images rise uninvited, we step onto it again, just as they did thousands of years ago, still listening, still interpreting, still wondering whether what we saw was a message, a memory, or something deeper that refuses to be fully explained.